Amen.
וחוץ רחם את קציר ארצכם. לא תחלט פת שדך לקצור, ולכת קצרך לא תלכת וכרמך לא תעולל, ופרת כרמך לא תלקט. לעני ולגר תעזוב אותם, אני אדוני אלוהיכם. לא תגנבו ולא תחשו ולא תשחרו איש במיתו. ולא תשבו בשמי לשוקר. ותללת את שם אלוהיך, אני אדוני. לא תשוך את רעך ולא תגזול, לא תלין פעולת שכיר איתך סופה, עד בוקר. לא תקלל הרש ולפני עיוור, לא תיתן מכשול. ויראת מאלוהיך, אני אדוני. לא תעשו עוול במשפט, לא תישא פני דל, ולא תהדר פני גדול. בצדק תשפוט עמיתך. לא תלך רכיל בעמך, לא תעמוד al dam recha. Ani Adonai lo tishna et achitcha bilvavecha ocheach tochiach et amitecha v'lo tisa ala chet lo tikom v'lo titor et b'nei amecha v'ahavta v'reacha kamocha ani Adonai.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torah temet v'chayei olam natah b'tochenu. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah. Please rise while the scroll is raised.
Please give me access to it. Romemu Adonai Eloheinu v'yishtachavu v'hakosho. Romemu Adonai Eloheinu v'yishtachavu v'hakosho. Ki kadosh Adonai Eloheinu romemu. Ki kadosh Adonai Eloheinu romemu.
Yes, I'll try to put this thing together.
Al shlosha devarim, al shlosha devarim, al shlosha devarim, haolam omed. Al shlosha devarim, al shlosha devarim, al shlosha devarim, haolam omed. Al haTorah, v'al ha'avodah, v'al gemilut hasadim. Al haTorah, v'al ha'avodah, v'al gemilut hasadim.
No, it's all right.
Al shlosha devarim, al shlosha devarim, al shlosha devarim, haolam omed.
I think the hardest thing to do in a COVID environment is that usually there's like about 4 people up here on the bima to do all of this, and at the moment there's just us. And if you stand up with that, since everybody's still standing, we'll do the prayers for the country, etc. I've done it.
Oh, that's it.
I did it while it was still open, Chair. Eternal God, whose dominion embraces the universe, we ask your blessing for our sovereign lady, Queen Elizabeth, for all the royal family and all those who govern our country. May all who influence the quality of its national life make them conscious of their responsibility and teach them to exercise it in accordance with your will. May we all help to fashion in this country a society that excels in freedom and justice, tolerance and compassion, so that it may be a force for righteousness and peace in the life of humanity. On page 494, may the one who blessed our ancestors bless all our brothers and sisters of the house of Israel who enter synagogues to pray and to give aid to those in need. May the Holy One, to whom all praise is due, hear their prayers and help them to fulfill their aspirations for good. Eternal God, our rock and redeemer, grant blessing to the state of Israel, created to fulfill an age-old dream and to be a haven for the oppressed. Inspire its leaders and citizens with faithfulness to the aims of its founders, to develop the land for the benefit of all its inhabitants, and to implement the prophetic ideals of liberty and justice. May they live in harmony with one another and in peace with their neighbors, and cause to come true once more the ancient vision that out of Zion shall go forth Torah and the word of God from Jerusalem. Yahalelu et Shem Adonai, ki nizgav shemo levado.
Oda et shamayim v'yarem keren ve'amo v'hila ha'asida l'fnei Hallelujah, hallelujah.
This is the covenant I will make with the house of Israel in time to come, says the Eternal One. I will put my teaching within them and engrave it on their hearts. I will be their God, and they shall be my people. No longer shall anyone need to teach a friend or a neighbor to know me, for they all shall know me, young and old alike.
Ashirenu Adonai Elecha v'nashua Kadesh Yameinu Kekedem Kadesh Yameinu
We can all now resume our seats if we haven't already. So we're currently in the Omer period. This is the period of time between Passover and Shavuot. And it sort of replicates the journeying of the Israelites. So actually today is the 27th day of the Omer, making 3 weeks and 6 days. Our ancestors did not immediately become free people upon leaving Egypt. They had to learn to be free. They had to learn how to live as a people. And the sages taught that it was during their time in the wilderness, which we mark by the Omer period, that they learned to be responsible adults. They learned to pull together, to respect each other's views, to respect each other, and of course, to worship the Eternal One and not other gods. When viewed in this context, today's Parashah, K'doshim, moves beyond being a simple collection of should and should nots. It's about the ways to unify our civil lives and religious lives in such a way that both are enriched. We cease being a slave people, but instead become a holy people. K'doshim begins with the instruction to speak to the people of Israel and tell them, "You shall be holy, for I, the Eternal One, your God, am holy." They didn't automatically become a holy people. That's a mistake that we'll see later in the book of Deuteronomy that Korach makes. Rather, what we have in K'doshim is more of an aspirational statement and a list of instructions to the Israelites on how to become that holy people. In contrast to much of Leviticus, which deals with ritual purity, and often seems aimed at the hereditary priesthood, this parashah is aimed at all the people. The rules it contains touch virtually every aspect of life of the people. How they act in the privacy of their home, how they conduct their business, how they think and how they worship. Distinctions between civil, criminal, and religious law are not made here. Like other sections of Torah, parts of K'doshim illustrate the sometimes painfully slow process of weaning the people away from old patterns of worship. Though the constant fear of falling into old practices is shown by the large chunks of Torah devoted to injunctions to avoid the practices of those around them who worshipped a variety of idols and other gods, this is not so relevant for us. In fact, we get a lot of that in this parashah. There's a lot of things about don't do this and don't do that, which is aimed at the practices of idolatry of the people that they lived among, what went on in their temples, what went on in their worship. So it's about sort of being different. But for us, our neighbors are by and large monotheists. And so they don't practice idolatry as Torah understands it. In these few brief chapters, the subject ranges from celebration of Shabbat to honoring one's parents, to refraining from idol worship, to the proper time to eat an animal sacrifice. Then it's off to agricultural law and then civil disputes. You shall not steal. You shall not swear falsely. Then you shall not steal once again. Then it goes on to the subject of contracts and disputes. Be fair with your workers. Respect the disabled. Be even-handed in judgment. Then there are the duties of the heart and a series of laws about what to think. Don't bear a grudge. Don't hate someone in your heart. Love your neighbor as yourself. And on it goes. It sometimes seems strange to find this discourse on righteousness embedded in the ritualized legalism of the rest of the book of Leviticus. But when examined closely, it teaches us the importance of context. At the center of ritual is the desire for righteousness. At the root of the law is the struggle to be a mensch, to be a human being. Torah is not simply a book of laws, but a series of lessons on righteousness. It gives a glimpse of the struggle of our ancestors to express for themselves their understanding of divine will. It shows them grappling with the issues of the day and with their own theological questions. Those who put together K'doshim seem to know all too well that while most of us might not commit an act of outright theft, we might be a bit careless around the edges, perhaps with our weights and measures. This first chapter, 19, sounds remarkably like the Ten Commandments. In many ways, as we've already heard, forbids theft, idol worship, and it reminds us to keep Shabbat. It tells us we must be impartial in our judgments. We may not take advantage of the disabilities of others. We must show honor and respect for the aged. We're not allowed to take vengeance or harbor grudges. We must not go on about as talebearers among the people. We're to love our neighbors and ourselves. Because after all, unless you love yourself, you can't really love your neighbor. And I'm suddenly realizing I'm sounding like RuPaul. Dear me. Sorry, just lost it now. I wrote this long before I really had heard RuPaul say that. It also contains one of the many reminders we find in Torah of how we should behave as we remember our days as a stranger in Egypt. When a stranger resides with you in your land, you shall not wrong him. The stranger who resides with you shall be to you as one of your citizens. You shall love him as yourself, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. These last couple of injunctions seem particularly apt today, as only yesterday I read the news of the drowning of around 130 Libyans trying to find a safe haven, whose distress signals were heard but ignored, both by European ships and by the Libyan Navy. They waited for the night to pass and then collected the bodies. It's not so long since Yom HaShoah. The proper response to coming out of Egypt and to surviving the Shoah are the same. Not seeking vengeance, but developing the sensitivity and the will to ensure that things do not happen to others. One of the values of service attendance is that we do hear these things read and discussed, and perhaps they creep into our consciousness. And every time I read this section about not withholding the wages of your workers, I'm reminded of Bernie Rose, the man for whom my mother worked in the late 1940s after the war. Having left a job for a major company because her paycheck was often late, she never ceased to marvel that he always paid her on time. It's funny, as a child, she always told me this story. Her version was that every Friday he came into work with two things, her pay packet and a piece of cardboard. The second of these he cut and placed inside his shoes, whose soles were worn out. So one day, she asked him, why did he always pay her on time and even raise her pay when he could not afford to get his shoes resoled? And he responded with surprise, what else could I do? I'm a Jew, and this is what Torah says is the way I should treat my employees. He had heard this read out so often, it had become an ingrained part of his worldview. And that sort of commitment impressed me enough to investigate Judaism when it became clear to me that the religion in which I was raised was never going to work for me. The first time I went to a synagogue, I met him as he was on welcome duty that day. I was early, and he showed me around, opened the art curtains, showed me the Torah scrolls, told me he wasn't particularly learned, but those who were said there were 613 commandments in Torah. He went on to say, well, he didn't think he was especially pious and thought he really didn't keep very many of them. And imagine his surprise when I told him I knew very well one that he kept, the one about not keeping back his workers' wages. And of course, he knew instantly who I was. I often hope that over the years I've developed such an ingrained response to ethical questions. We, like our ancestors, should aspire to become a holy people by seeing the unity between our religious and civil lives, by uniting our private and public lives in such a way that both are enriched. In truth, the heart of the holiness code lies in the phrase, "Ve'ahavta l'oreacha kamocha," shall love your neighbor as yourself. If we can manage that, we can become the holy people envisioned long ago. Holiness is independent of one's age or surroundings. It's the dream of a better world and the desire to play our part in its coming. Holiness is the commitment to live these words that lie at the heart of Torah. And then we will have done as it was said. You shall be holy, for I, the Eternal One, am holy. And we continue now with our concluding prayers. And in fact, the Aleinu prayer is one that looks at that future time that we hope. And before we sing the Judy Chicago prayer, I've brought something that turned up on a Facebook page called something like Uploading 5781. This is a version of the Aleinu by Tricia Arlen. The word Aleinu basically means it's upon us. This is how it starts. It is upon us. It is upon us to repair the broken places. It is upon us to comfort the sick in body and heart. It is upon us to bring sweetness to those around us. It is upon us to face the truth. It is upon us to see that justice is done. It is upon us to return to our core and our decent selves. It is upon us to understand that our prayers are empty without action. V'anachnu korim. We bend our knees. We bend our knees to acknowledge how small we are in the face of all this responsibility. We bend our knees to warm up for all the tasks to come. We bend our knees so that we may dance at our victories. We are all one in the oneness. There is no other, and there is no one else to do the hard work. It is upon us to save the world. And we continue with the Judy Chicago poem, which you can find in your Siddur on page 213, which Vince will sing to Rebecca's composition.
And then all that's divided us will merge. And then compassion will be wedded to power. And then softness will come to a world that is harsh and unkind. And then men and women will be gentle. Both women and men will be strong. And then no person will be subject to another's will. And then all will be rich and free and varied. And then the greed of some will give way to the needs of many. And then all will share equally in the earth's abundance. And then all will care for the sick and the weak and the old. And then all will nourish the young. And then all will cherish life's creatures. And then all will live in harmony with each other and the earth. And then everywhere will be called Eden once again.
We continue now with Kaddish as we recall those with whom we once shared Shabbats and festivals and our joys of life. The growing good of the world is partly dependent on unhistoric acts, and that things are not so ill with you and me as they might have been is half owing to the number who lived faithfully a hidden life and rest in unvisited tombs. Even when they are gone, the departed are with us. They inspire us to live as in their higher moments they themselves sought to live. We remember them now. They remain in our hearts. They are a continual blessing. And this Shabbat, we think of Shirley Crevice, the mother of Stephanie Wogenig and the grandmother of Joshua, of John Tyrer, the husband of Joyce Tyrer, of Basil Stone, the father of Ray Stone, of Estelle Seitman, the mother of Lori Seitman, of my mother, Bonnie Darley. If there are any other names that anyone would like to add, anything come up? No. Any other names? So for those whom we have named, I'd also like to add those 130 people who died needlessly because of our reluctance, the reluctance of the rest of the world to help them. Those whom we have named, for those whose names we hold in our hearts, and for those for whom there is no one left to say Kaddish, we rise on page 524 and we join together in the Kaddish. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbi. V'alma divrach yerutei v'yamlich malchutei. B'chayechon v'yomechon. Uv'chayei d'chol Beit Yisrael. B'agalah v'zman kariv v'imru. Amen. Yehei shemei Rab b'mvorach le'olam l'almei maya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh. V'yitadar v'yitalei v'yitalal shmei d'kudashah b'ruchu. Le'ela min kol berchata v'shirata tishbachata v'nechemata da'amiran b'alma v'imru. Amen. Yehei shalom rabba min shemaya v'chaim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru. Amen. Osei shalom b'mramav huya osei shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'al kol b'nei Adam. May the Most High, source of perfect peace, grant peace to us, to all Israel, and to all humanity. And let us say, Amen. And we can resume our seats for a few moments. Are there any announcements that are to be made? Does anyone have any announcements? I will call your attention to the fact that next Shabbat is the Liberal Judaism's biennial, and it will all be online. And there are a great many different speakers. And there will be services, and the services will be very interesting because the biennial services will have different parts in the service from different congregations. So it's a real chance to see what Liberal Judaism looks like as a movement and to hear some actually very outstanding speakers, both from within Liberal Judaism, from the UK, and also from other places, because that's one of the beauties of being online, is that we can have speakers from the United States or from wherever without having to fly them in. So you should find information online. I believe there's information up on our Facebook page, and it'll be in the bulletin. Okay. And I think just to say, I can hardly wait, really. One of my favorite things is congregational singing, and it just would be so nice to just hear everybody singing and joining in. So I'm looking forward to the time, may it not be long, that we can actually do that. And we're going to conclude with a very short tune composed by Rabbi Yitzhak Hankin, called "Help Us to Teach Us to Treasure Each Day."
Yeah. The line comes from one of the Psalms. Teach us to treasure each day, so that it may be an opportunity for opening our hearts to God's wisdom. And the Hebrew comes first, and then the words I've just said in English. Limnot yameinu, limnot yameinu, limnot yameinu, kein oda v'navi levav chokmah. Limnot yameinu kein hoda v'navi levav chokmah. Teach us to treasure each day. Teach us to treasure each day. That we may open our hearts to your wisdom. Teach us to treasure each day. That we may open our hearts to your wisdom. Teach us to treasure each day.
Please rise for concluding benediction. May the source of strength, who blessed the ones before us, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing. And let us say, Amen. We get to go outside into the garden for Kiddush.